Listo, ya estamos en directo, gracias.
Muy bien. O sea, empezamos en 2 minutos. Sí, Adriana, tenemos que cortar bien a las, digamos, y 20, ¿no? ¿Verdad? A las
Perfecto.
12 y 20 nuestras tenemos que estar cerrando, y media es la, digamos, es la adopción de la agenda y después el cierre. Entonces vamos bien como con los tiempos.
Perfecto.
Hasta ahora, no para meterte presión, pero hasta ahora hemos estado muy bien con los tiempos.
Muy bien. Bueno. Comenzamos, Sebastián.
Empezamos.
Shall we begin? Yes, let's begin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the presentation of the Latin American Economic Outlook 2020 Digital Transformation for a Building Back Better. This is a collaborative effort carried out by ECLAC, CAF, European Union, and the OECD. We have a very interesting panel today, panel presentation, with addressing the impact of COVID-19 on Latin America. The COVID pandemic is having a profound impact on socioeconomic conditions in Latin America and the Caribbean, accentuating an already very complex scenario due to the structural weaknesses in the region. The Economic Outlook for Latin America and the Caribbean 2020 explores how the digital transformation can help to address the current socioeconomic situation, boost productivity, strengthen institutions, and achieve higher levels of inclusion and well-being. To address this, we have 2 sessions today. The first session includes a panel presentation on the main findings of the document. Joining us for this panel are Sebastian Rovira, ECLAC Economic Affairs Officer, Sebastian Nieto Parra, Head of Latin America and the Caribbean of the OECD Development Center, Georgiana Macovey, Thematic Officer in charge of Digital Transformation at the European Union. So without further ado, let us begin this panel presentation, and please mind the time. Thank you. Sebastian, you have the floor. Thank you, Adriana. Good morning to everyone in Chile and Latin America. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you to ECLAC and ELAC for this invitation. We are here to point out the key findings of the report, a report conducted jointly by the European Union, the CAF, OECD, ECLAC. Now, this report always contains a macroeconomic part where we assess the socioeconomic challenges the region faces, as well as the opportunities for more sustainable growth. And today we will also talk about the post-COVID recovery period as highlighted under the Outlook 2020. Now, we know that every year we address something different. This year we are specifically addressing digital transformation for building back better. And over the last few days of ELAC 2020, we have clearly addressed this issue. Our colleagues will refer to that. We've talked about, we were working on this topic prior to the pandemic, and clearly the pandemic has reinforced the need to continue assessing this and reinforcing our capacity in this regard, and not just in Latin America, but elsewhere, and including international cooperation, and Joanna will refer to this later. Without further ado, let me focus on the macrostructural aspect of the region. The starting point is this crisis. At that point, prior to the crisis, we had relatively low productivity levels. In fact, with regard to 1950, labor productivity in Latin America was twice what it was globally. Today, however, in Latin America, we can see that we are below the global average. Now, there's a great deal of social discontent, inequalities, in addition to these low levels of labor productivity. Now, In 2020, we will record exceptionally low growth. The growth rate for 2020 will be much lower than what we have seen in decades prior or since the beginning of the 20th century. So this is an ongoing crisis that has resulted in a drop in GDP, per capita income, which will be close to what we had in 2009. We're basically stepping back 10 years in terms of per capita income. This is symmetric, and this is affecting most of the vulnerable households, the most vulnerable companies, and according to ECLAC information, close to 20% of micro enterprises may go bankrupt without the intervention of public policy. We are also seeing that close to 40% of workers are not covered by any social protection mechanism and are working in the informal sector. More than half of the informal workers in the informal sector are greatly affected by this, and this has exacerbated poverty in Latin America. And once again, this report insists on the need to consolidate the middle class and try to help lifting a significant portion of the population out of poverty. Key measures have been taken to address this crisis. As far as monetary actions are concerned, we can see that since the beginning of the confinement processes, we saw a drop in interest rates. We saw support by public and private sectors. We have also seen that several central banks in Latin America, given their independence and their policies, have allowed for counter-cyclical policies to be implemented. And we have also seen that there are greater actions on the monetary side. So we see that there are good monetary decisions, but they're limited in terms of the scope of this crisis. Internationally speaking, the crisis has also been joined by high international liquidity, which is unique. This is not always a synonym of international crisis. This has resulted in the possibility of greater debt to be issued to address the crisis. We have seen that as a result there's been sustainable recovery as far as social aspects are concerned, but fiscal as well. Now, if we look at where we were when the crisis started, next slide please, we can see that Latin America had higher public debt when compared to 2018, and this resulted in less fiscal wiggle room. And we have seen that certain key actions have been taken from a fiscal realm in order to try to overcome this crisis. Now, especially when we talk about fiscal aspects, public debt is key. That is, how can we have sustainability, fiscal sustainability in Latin America, and we need to understand what type of debt we are incurring in and what can be done in order to prevent debt crises and respond to the socioeconomic crisis that we are experiencing. Now, this calls for coordinated actions between various stakeholders, public, for example, states, creditors, in addition to private actors, private creditors, but multilateral banks as well. Now, and this goes above and beyond the per capita GDP. This is also linked to the agenda for greater fiscal sustainability. We are seeing that Latin America has low levels of competitiveness, high levels of inequality, and this is precisely an opportunity to take a leap forward in terms of sustainable, inclusive growth. More so than ever before, we need to think about fiscal impact, having an impact on greater productivity, and being more inclusive. Now, this is broad strokes, the macro aspects. Clearly, there is much more information, and we would like to invite you to read the entire Latin American Economic Outlook 2020. Why is digital transformation a key aspect today? Well, primarily because it's a global trend that we saw started prior to the crisis. Here you can see information on foreign direct investment, financial flows, commercial flow, e-commerce, and what we've done with regard to the international bandwidth traffic. You can see that the situation is quite amazing. Also, now let's look at what has happened. This was pre-crisis. Now let's look at what happened during the crisis. It's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity, that is, to include digital strategy as part of your productivity, social strategy. And with regard to e-commerce, we have seen a significant increase in this activity during the confinement period. Let's look at some key figures regarding internet users in Latin America. For example, the figure in the last decade has doubled. We see, however, that the OECD countries have an 84% internet rate, and in Latin America it's less than that, roughly 70. We need to assess the quality of these users and the internet access, and we need to assess how inclusive this is at a demographic level in terms of socioeconomic groups. Let me refer to not just quantity but quality of access to and the use of internet. We have data on bandwidth, and we have data on the situation prior to the pandemic showing that speed in Latin America does not reach the global standard, and that many individuals do not have enough sustainable service to have telework or to have several devices connected at the same time in one single household. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Sebastián Rovira to talk about what companies, workers, schools, and governments can do to take advantage of the digital transformation. So without further ado, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Sebastian, you apparently still muted. Very well. Well, as I was saying, welcome everyone, and thank you to the Vice Minister of the Dominican Republic, as well as HESIC and the Foundation, Carolina, Jose Antonio. Thank you all for joining us in the discussion on this document, which we of course find is particularly salient at this time in the context of this ministerial conference on the information society. As we know, we have now been working for some 15 years, and the topic is, of course, more germane than ever before. Sebastián had mentioned some of the important aspects. Of course, last year we presented this paper and no one could really envision or knew how important the digital world would become so quickly in the context of this COVID-19 crisis, where certainly one of the key elements has been the process of being in lockdown or quarantine and the impact on society, on economies, and the role that digital technologies has played in that is, of course, known to us all. We have been working on the digital agenda with the countries in the region now for some time. And while we look at a lot of these different indicators, I think it is important to look at this topic of connectivity, of infrastructure, of access and use by people, individuals, and corporations. I think we need to put this in the proper context. And why do I say this? Because indubitably, we cannot just believe that providing infrastructure or facilitating access by companies or reducing the digital divide, which is certainly important. Nobody would debate that, but we can't assume that this automatically will then be transformed or translated into the change in the development models of our countries. Now, why? Because undoubtedly the countries in the region still have huge limitations in structural terms. And that means, for example, that the solutions, digital solutions, the way that they've been used primarily in the context of the pandemic, in education, in e-commerce, e-working, and remote healthcare, have all been limited by the structural issues that we have in many of our countries. Now, one of those has to do with this shortcoming in terms of the infrastructure for connectivity that many of our countries suffer from. It has been noted time and time again in the course of this conference, the different issues for age groups, rural areas versus urban, school-going children, and so forth. There's a very large percentage among the younger children, for example, who do not have access to the internet. The same thing happens with senior citizens. In other words, there are still a lot of socioeconomic factors that are having a tremendous impact and thwarting our efforts to take full advantage of the available technologies. So digital tech is important, but we need to keep this socioeconomic reality in mind as well. The second thing is the capabilities that we have in our countries to use these technologies. It is really quite impressive when you look at some of the indicators, such as the use of social media. When you see how many hours a day Latin Americans and Caribbeans are spending online on social media as compared to other countries such as Germany and Japan. So there's some 3 to 3.5 hours a day on social media. In the region, the Japanese spend less than 1 hour on it. And this also very often has to do with the use and the type of technologies that we're interacting with. And this has to do also with capabilities, digital capabilities, digital skills and knowledge. The topic of companies and corporate level, as others have said, and I'll show you a few indicators in a moment. While we've certainly reduced the gap and closed the divide, we're still looking at the most basic technologies. When you look at things that are a little bit more sophisticated in the digital world, we're very much lagging behind. The next level has to do with our institutional capabilities. When we talk about institutional capabilities, we're talking about the abilities of our governments, our institutions, and how we can use these digital technologies to bolster trust, to understand what people need, but also we need to understand what is happening in different areas geographically and understand the phenomena in schools and other places that have such an important role in training our people. So in this part of the presentation, I would like to look at a few indicators, point out where we stand in digitalization of companies, schools, and so forth. Now, let's start with the corporate level. Let's see how we can participate more effectively in a digital ecosystem. Not an ecosystem as an existing fact, but how it is emerging and transforming. First, very often we talk about digital technologies as if they were all in the same sack. We actually need to identify within and among them the different types of digital technologies and the impact or the linkage that each has to each subsystem. Now, why? Because obviously the impact of digital technology on the traditional economy is one thing, because there's the creation and through disruption of traditional sectors, so that's one thing, and that has to do with the incorporation of certain technologies, softwares, management techniques, productive processes, and so forth. But we're really changing the traditional economy significantly. In that regard, we have to understand where we stand in terms of telecom, IT services, hardware, software that will enable me to better handle this traditional economy. Secondly, what is the role of the so-called digital economy? And that is where we are talking about platform economies, digital services, gig economy, sharing economy, and so forth. It's not just in terms of the development of the sector, and we've seen this happen in the pandemic. E-commerce has really taken over and enabled small and mid-sized companies, particularly an opportunity to continue to work and to continue to maintain their income, again, through these platforms. Then we have the digitalized economy, the e-business, e-commerce, Industry 4.0, and the algorithmic economy. This enables us to really change the management and the consumption patterns. And what we have at the heart of all of this is the impact and how that interact with the development of individuals with digital rights, with digital citizenship, and the impact on the environment and the ability to strengthen the circular economy. So when we're talking about the corporate level, we need to understand what is happening throughout this ecosystem. Now, in all likelihood, we are all aware that in our companies, there is very limited use of technology, particularly in the SMEs. Here we're talking about the formal economy. When we're talking about the informal economy, that use of technology is even more limited. And again, we're talking about basic technologies. Do they have the computer? Do they have connection to the internet? And so forth. And as we can see here between 2010, 2017, there's still, while we made progress, there's still a long way to go. Again, this is data through 2017. I am confident that if we had the figures through 2020, we would see very fast-paced change and an adoption of technologies across the board, schools, government, private sector, everywhere, because of the pandemic. there has been this huge upsurge in these technologies. The risk, of course, has always been that when acting in one area or another, we see a certain polarization and an expansion of the inequalities between the digital haves and the digital have-nots in our countries. And we see this at the individual level and at the corporate level. This is a little bit more sophisticated analysis, but we can see here that this is where the biggest gaps lie when we talk about certain types of technology. Now, when we're talking about workers, and there's certainly a concern about how automation can affect employment and the threats that automation brings to the workforce. And there's the question of automation, but also how work from home, remote work affects employees. And the gap is bigger today than it was perhaps when the study was done, because those who are using these types of tools for working remotely are the ones who tend to be in our higher income gap or income levels, and we end up with a more polarized society. So work from home has been a good solution, but we need to understand that just some 21% of workers in Latin America and the Caribbean can work from home, whereas in the US, EU, we're talking of about 40% that are in a position to work from home. So this is the reality, and we need to see what we can do to facilitate, again, access and use to these technologies. Another aspect has to do with the digital capabilities that we have in our countries. We have a very large portion of adults without high school or college educations in the region, and therefore that lack certain skills that are necessary to use these technologies appropriately. We do need to keep that in mind, but it's also important to consider the ability to engage in critical thinking. People say, well, they're trained or they're not trained in using technologies, but other skills, critical thinking skills, are of the utmost importance. And what we're seeing is on the left is the equivalent of high school education, where we see a large number of people who do not have ICT or who would not pass a basic ICT test. This is based on competencies and skills of adults. And then what we see at the level of tertiary or college level education. And of course, we can see that the average of Latin America and the Caribbean is very different from that of more developed countries. In terms of the schools, we also can see quite clearly that there are important distinctions in connectivity and access to internet. Of course, there's a question of income. Individuals or schools with greater income have access to better equipment and better access to the network and have access, of course, to a number of different services simultaneously. But of particular concern is the difference between public and private schools. This is where we find the biggest gaps. Recently, the World Bank released a study in Chile where the calculation was that as a result of the pandemic, students will miss over a year's worth of education. It's not a lost decade, but a lost year academically due to the pandemic. And so obviously those who have suffered the most from this are the students who are in public schools, and the impact will be less severe on the private schools. So obviously, again, our schools were not prepared for digital learning prior to the pandemic. While there has been a fast-paced response, we launched a report recently that looked at the experiences of different countries in the context of education in schools and how they could scale up quickly the use of these technologies. And again, while there was relatively quick rollout, undoubtedly we are not sufficiently prepared in terms of the skills, the abilities, the technologies, the abilities of teachers to use these technologies, and therefore we are seeing setbacks in that regard.
De estas diferentes.
Now, we have seen that there are also economic factors that stand out as and that allow us to understand that these gaps are also related to gender and how girls may be or may not be interested in using this type of technology. Now, clearly, it's important to bear in mind the autonomy of girls and women in the economy, the digital economy going forward. Now, what about how governments can use these technologies to be more credible and innovative and to understand what individuals' real needs are and respond accordingly? For example, gather information to better understand what societies consume, what they're concerned with, and gather all this information to inform policy making. And also this allows the institutions and the individuals to close that relationship gap, if you will. And I think that will be a positive impact and very relevant in the future. Here I have a figure that refers to data and how data may be a key source of information for decision making. We know that, we said that, and one of the aspects underscored in the report is related to information and data management. Now, clearly this is one of the key pillars of the digital agenda, and we have to figure out how these regional dialogues allow us to adopt a regional position. That is, how can we ensure and reinforce how can we ensure our data will be credible and reinforce credible data, and all in order to further develop economies that are more inclusive, more sustainable, and that include all individuals across the board. Thank you, Sebastian.
¿Se me escucha?
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Good morning. Greetings from Brussels. First of all, I would like to thank ELAC for this invitation, and I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to point out the excellent collaboration that we have had between ECLAC, the OECD, and the European Union in order to prepare this report. So on behalf of my colleagues who have contributed to this report, and thank you. And thank you to Sebastian and others. It's a pleasure for me to talk about international cooperation in keeping with the context we're addressing today and in keeping with the European Union context. Now, we all know that we are seeing and experiencing the true potential of digital technology to stay online, to stay connected, to work from home, learn from home, and to continue engaging products and services. Now, COVID-19 has clearly pointed out the repercussions of the digital divide, as Sebastian referred to that, and this has made more patent the national challenges and gaps in terms of the digital transformation. We know that there are many risks, and we have taken these, faced these quicker than we expected, and so we need more efforts to best leverage the technology for recovery. Now, obviously, this challenge, taking on this challenge, involves a close cooperation and collaboration articulation between various parties. Traditional cooperation has not met expectations and needs to evolve toward a model that is three-pronged. One prong would support the development strategies of the LAC countries and bear in mind the multi-faceted character of their realities, and then link these with international situations. Secondly, the second prong is that we must have inclusive, productive dialogue platforms. All levels of countries, regardless of their development, can engage in this dialogue. And then the third prong is this new reshaped international cooperation needs to involve more stakeholders. We need to expand the opportunities and have a larger impact. Digital transformation has implications for various dimensions, for example, education, security, safety, health, the environment. So this is the ideal context to apply this new type of international cooperation. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, we already have a few examples that show that new partnerships are developing. For example, the Pacific Alliance, the Mesoamerican Program of the Central American countries, and others. But I think we can go beyond that in order to face the development traps, as we saw under last year's Latin American Economic Outlook. So this year we propose working in 3 areas of action. 1, nationally, by strengthening the institutional capacity and bearing in mind that the most effective initiatives that we've seen thus far are those that tackle several different challenges at the same time. Secondly, work globally and regionally on multilateral inclusive governance programs and platforms in order to facilitate exchange and equal terms. And then thirdly, we propose working in the most inclusive fashion by involving all the stakeholders, private sector, civil society, academia, etc., to reach internationally agreed upon policies. Now this, for example, consists of setting up platforms to exchange know-how and information, and to insist on technology transfer and capacity development, building, and using multilateral or South-South or triangular cooperation initiatives. Now, obviously, there are many challenges, and it won't be easy to follow this model or apply this model. However, I think there's an interesting proposal that could allow us to kill several birds with one stone. The report refers to the digital agenda, the regional digital agenda, and this could be a key platform for fostering dialogue on social policies, capacity building, exchanging knowledge. So this is a proposal that has been under discussion for quite a while within ELAC, and as far as the European perspective is concerned, we think there are 4 aspects that need to be met in order to come up with what we call the digital market. Now, first of all, political will of the member states is key. There are 27 members of the European Union, and we all adopted a long-term vision, forward-looking vision, more than 4 or 5 years of the political mandate, and this resulted in a key cross-border transformation digitally. And then secondly, it's necessary to have a common regulatory framework that allows for flexibility to adapt to new challenges, and also to implement this novel digital transformation culture. Also, transformation funds are necessary so that the least advanced countries can catch up to the others in terms of infrastructure, capacity, etc. And then finally, it's necessary to have a strategy that's based on mutual inclusive benefits, and the key goal here should be putting citizens and citizen rights at the heart of this strategy. As far as the future is concerned, in February of this year, the European Union adopted a new strategy called Shaping Europe's Digital Future, and a new initiative regarding uh, artificial intelligence. The idea is to create a Europe that is suited to, or ready, poised to move into the digital era. This involves addressing critical infrastructure, digital education, democracy, digital skills, and other aspects. So 9 months later, in the post-COVID scenario, these priorities are even more pertinent. Let me point out a key feature of the European model. This is specifically creating cooperative partnerships and alliances. Next year, we will launch a European initiative regarding digital cooperation. This will allow us to contribute more innovation, more ambition, and more flexibility to the multilateralism, and the European model, we believe, is unique, single, and in this regard, Latin America and the Caribbean are natural partners for the European Union, not only because we share values, but also because we share challenges and opportunities regarding the digital era. So we aim to reinforce our cooperation going forward. For example, we can jointly identify the gaps with regard to policies and strategies, as Sebastian mentioned, and work together on different areas such as intelligent regulation of the digital ecosystem and the ethical artificial intelligence, for example, open internet governance principles, the challenges relative to connectivity, and not just regarding access, because we know the quality of one's network is essential so that internet can be used the right way and be a tool for productivity, supporting citizens and SMEs. But we're not starting from scratch. We know that there are several good practices out there that can serve as a foundation. For example, cooperation, and then in terms of this new spirit of the Outlook 2020, our region, we have a regional program. It's a transatlantic program that will allow for streaming data quicker throughout Latin America starting next year. Now, I would like to mention that we aim to promote social inclusion as well in the region through digital tools, and this also allows countries to close the digital divide and focus on their national priorities. To conclude, these are just some examples of international cooperation models relative to digital transformation, and as mentioned under LEO 2020. I also agree that the way in which the European Union aims to further collaborate with Latin America in the future. So together we aim to come up with a new narrative relative to international cooperation in the digital era. The idea is not, we do not aim to impose our perspective, but rather we would like to share 20 years, more than 20 years of good experiences with you, and make all of our tools available to you. And I'm referring to knowledge and the expertise that we hold within our member states. Of course, you can come up with your own policies as necessary for you to ensure that they're adapted to your digital reality. But from the European perspective, we are fully convinced that we can make a positive contribution to this process. In this regard, LEO 2020 is a good source, a good linkage for cooperation, and I hope I have not taken up too much time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Georgiana. Perfect timing. Thank you both Sebastians for talking about your perspective in the region and how the digital transformation will evolve and how international cooperation can assist the region in overcoming the challenging circumstances it faces today.
To comment on the experiences and the information on the report, we will now have a panel including Jose David Montilla, Deputy Minister of Digital Agenda of the Ministry of the Presidency of the Government of the Dominican Republic, Susana Dornel, Coordinator of the Digital Agenda and Information Society Observatory of the Division of Uruguayan Agency of Electronic Government and Information Society, as well as Jose Antonio Senauja, who is a Director of Fundación Carolina. We will ask you to stick to the 15 minutes allotted to each of you so that we can then have some time for Q&A. Very well. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation for our office, the Ministry of the Presidency of the Government of the Dominican Republic, to comment on the report and address the general situation that we are experiencing in our countries. I would also like to thank the OECD, ECLAC, and the other panelists from Latin America and the Caribbean who are connected for being here and for sharing such interesting information. The report is very well done. The assessment is very accurate. It was done prior to the pandemic, but it does reflect the reality of all of our countries. We are all submitted to a process that is twofold. First, all of the countries of Latin America, practically in the Caribbean, had embraced digital transformation and modernization on our agendas. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we are making this process we're going through it much faster, and this has had an impact, obviously, on people and on public administration. Again, the impact is quite clear, and also it is equally clear that we were not prepared. We were not ready for it. We also know what our domestic indicators and international indicators are with regard to our microeconomy, macroeconomy, unemployment, the impact on GDP. And therefore, we all, as a nation, have sought to redefine our priorities, considering that we can accelerate a reactivation and social activation. As how we can look at the national policy or how we can prioritize. As Sebastián Nieto mentioned, it is the time to step back, to create a national integration agenda or to look at these drivers to see what the best use of these resources will be. And again, always focusing on the individual as our citizens, because these processes have to be citizen oriented. We know the impact that these processes, this situation, the pandemic has had on our people. It's not just a nice to have, but it is fundamental in terms of being able to bolster productivity of companies and our ability to deliver in terms of e-government. It is a race to see how much I can move forward, how much we can modernize. It is necessary, it is imminent, and that is why, as a country in the Dominican Republic, we have again embraced the digital transformation as a crucial tool in building back. And as we've seen this morning, we are clearly aligned with these situations. We know where we need to improve. We know how to move specific features and indicators forward. Let me again refer to what Sebastián Nieto has said, because we need to be in alignment, the alignment in the strategies and government. We have a national development strategy. We're all aligned, of course, with the SDGs, but the integration agenda, the development, the digital agenda has to be aligned with and prioritized in conjunction with social reactivation, economic reactivation, and again, citizen focused. We need concrete actions that are win-win, in which the population can see what is going on. The foundation is access, it's connectivity. We can't talk about services if the minimum conditions of access and connectivity are not in place. Therefore, our priorities must focus on access and connectivity. And as you know, this goes from the internet, as has been noted, not just the question of the number of users connected, but the speed, the quality of these connections, to being able to access actual devices in the different social strata. The second point that we have to work on is that of digital government. And in that regard, this also depends on the former, connectivity and access, because we can provide digital services, but my people need to have enough bandwidth to be able to connect. Do my schools have it? Do my healthcare centers have it? Do our citizens have that ability? Do they have the ability to capacity to pay for the access and for these services? Obviously, we need to continue to digitalize and digitize our services, but we also need to ensure that our people are able to access them. This has to do with open data and a government data warehouse to centralize critical information, the standards for interoperability, data, metadata, and to be able to reduce cost and simplify things in terms of public services. There are, in that regard, three things that there are certain regulations, certain procedures, and this allows us to focus on certain specific aspects. In the midst of a pandemic, we should not be requiring our citizens to be the messenger of the state that has to go between institutions collecting information to then present it to the public administration. On the contrary, we need to simplify, reduce red tape. And from the public administration, providing public education, public health remotely. Again, even in our case, as you know, we are an island and that is heavily dependent on tourism. We also need to highlight the initiatives that will allow for digital tourism. All of this has to be on our agenda. That is how we can reactivate. We know where our priorities lie, and we need to work in that regard. The report itself also quite rightly addresses the topic of an increase in productivity. And as we've seen, there's an impact on the region and how the economies depend on the creation of goods and services. And therefore, when we talk about the digital economy, we need to look at the micro and small and mid-sized companies from the perspective of government. And we all as a society need to, again, ensure that we are addressing the needs of the vast majority of these companies, which are responsible for the greatest levels of employment and GDP in our countries. We need to introduce, therefore, more technology for these micro and SMEs. We're talking about cashless societies, contactless societies, changing regulations that will allow us to adapt and adjust and use digital means as we've all had to do during this pandemic when we were in lockdown. But we need to create the conditions so that we can be more efficient, more effective in our operations. Let me also highlight what Sebastián Rovira has highlighted, and that has to do with digital capabilities, digital skills. If we're talking about a digital agenda, if we're talking about digital strategy that involves civil society, academics, government, and all of this is focused on the citizen, then obviously we need to pay close attention to skills, inclusion, digital competencies, digital abilities, and capabilities in each of these areas that we have just mentioned. Therefore, creating access, creating opportunities, providing education to generate the appropriate digital skills, providing incentives for our citizens to develop these skills, these abilities, these competencies, so that they can then participate in the economy, to access public services, to take full advantage of the resources that they have at their fingertips, need to be at the top of our agenda. And this is very clearly laid out in the report that we have just seen. It is, of course, also important to pay close attention to the legal framework. E-governance means changing the legal structures, the scaffolding that supports our system, because many changes are needed. We also, however, need to ensure that we're avoiding duplication of effort. This onslaught of online activities has also led, and this is an additional topic, of course, that should be a priority on our national agendas, that has to do with cybersecurity. Innovation is a fourth area, which is essential to production. Georgiana mentioned something that is highlighted in the report, and that is the question of international cooperation, regional cooperation, the exchange of information, that digital regional framework that we need, because we cannot continue to operate in isolation, literally as an island. We need to come together. We all are facing the same situation. Some are better prepared than others, but we all need to come together to grapple with this. Lastly, and just to add a few more thoughts to my comments, we need to link all of this to public policies so that they can be instituted at the highest level to ensure effective policies. I am thrilled to see this document, this report, its conclusions, and note that we all need to work together along the lines of this report and along the lines of what has been said here. We need to reactivate our economies and our societies along these lines. Thank you very much, Vice Minister, for these very important points and for your accent on coordination and the need to strengthen infrastructure with a view toward greater connectivity. That is a particularly salient thought and a cross-cutting idea. Let me now turn the floor to Susana Dornell. Susana, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes, we can. Thank you for allowing me to take part in this panel. I would like to commend you for the report from Uruguay. We truly celebrate initiatives such as this one. When Sebastian mentioned that we never imagined last year when we were working on the draft that this would be such a useful document for our countries today. Who knew? Now, we work closely with comparative data. We care about that. We trust in the value of data, in the contribution to public policies.
Bueno, este informe tiene muchísimos datos, pero tiene una riqueza enorme.
And we know that data is essential for wealth of analyses. We would like to celebrate this effort, this type of effort, and we do, as far as the information is concerned, but also because this adds to cooperation, and this makes it very clear what the good practices are, what the success stories are, what the paths forward are. So I think this will be extremely useful. And as I would just like to reiterate that we appreciate this effort for national endeavors, but for regional endeavors in order to find a way to overcome this crisis. Now, I think the various aspects of digital society and the digital era are quite clear in this document and relevant. Digital skills are no longer the traditional ones. One needs to apply critical thinking to digital tasks, etc. I think all of the factors have contributed to allowing us to make more sophisticated decisions, and the efforts undertaken by the countries in terms of coming up with more sophisticated indicators, more sophisticated decisions, all end up with more sophisticated public policy. So that has been our experience in Uruguay. We have scrutinized the content significantly of the report, that is, and I wanted to share a few nuggets with you with regard to the Uruguayan experience and refer to COVID and what we're doing and where we stand. Let me mention that, well, what has been key this year? Well, closing the gap. It was essential to have 20% of the poorest with 80% internet coverage. So closing this digital divide, of course, is relevant today specifically. Not always, but I think over the last year has been essential. And we are very pleased with the results, having a high internet access penetration would have been for naught otherwise. Our hospitals are online. Another example, we're extremely proud of that. Now, it's not just to say 100% of our hospitals are online. We know that this has been a key driver for implementing our emergency public policy. And as far as information management is concerned, well, schools are online. Our children are no longer at schools, but nonetheless, we have all of our public schools linked to the platform, and they are able to carry on with their educational activities. So that small group that's not connected, or because of a lack of infrastructure, or because of a quality gap, what have you, or limited access to bandwidth. In those cases, the educational institutions, establishments had to go through the school districts neighborhood by neighborhood to boost the quality of those areas that were wanting, and to make sure all the children had the same opportunities. Now, I just wanted to mention that because that brings me to the importance of quality, and that's one of the gaps we need to close in addition to digital skills. Now, let me refer to health and the electronic medical file system that we aim to implement nationally so that all of the providers can share data. It would be a single unified system. And we are currently launching a project entitled My e-medical file that would allow individuals to have access to their own medical history, including everything. And we know that these medical services or telehealth has been added to this project. Those are the key gaps that are left over from previous generations, if you will, that we are still trying to close. Now let me go back to the importance of information, because part of the process involves good training, good education. Moreover, we have our ICT module, which is part of our household survey, which has gone not online but on phone lines during the pandemic. And then we have a specific survey that is actually coordinated with the statistics agency. It's a specific survey on the use of technology and personal value assessments. And this was key, I think, for the decisions that we've had to make this year. So in short, what I am referring to is related to what all the panelists have mentioned, and the report refers to boosting national developments, the quality of information, the quality of data, and coming up with more sophisticated data. I think the report is spot on in terms of data for decision making and other aspects. Now, Uruguay, with regard to challenges, Uruguay will be launching its 5-year digital agenda in just a few days. Could you kindly wrap up, Susana? Yes, I just wanted to let you know that we, as far as competitiveness and digital citizens, we are launching, these are two key critical aspects of our 5-year digital agenda. We think this will aid the industrial and production sector and SME. So thank you very much for the report. Thank you, Susana, for pointing out how these will boost knowledge-based processes. Jose Antonio, the floor is yours. Good day, good afternoon, really depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to first thank the organizers for the opportunity to comment on this excellent report. Let me mention that I work at the Carolina Foundation, which is a foundation primarily focused on academic mobility within Iberoamerica, and today we have several agreements with more than 400 universities in Spain and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this user group has been significantly sensitive to the impact of the pandemic. We've seen what the repercussions it has had for superior education. And that's just one perspective. That's where I'm coming from. And then I'm a special advisor for Latin America and the Caribbean for the high-level representative of cybersecurity. And in that regard, I will refer to some of the challenges pointed out under the report. Challenges for Latin America, the Caribbean, and the European Union. Now, Georgiana's remarks recently also spoke to this, and they were interesting. Let me focus on three ideas. Now, after reading the report that occurred to me, the first one is related to the ties between the digital gap and socioeconomic aspects. I know this is key for the region and for EU cooperation. And secondly, opportunities, the opportunities resulting from this issue. And we know that right now we are relaunching the Latin American and European Union relations. And we know that there's a landmark ministerial conference that will be held on December 14th of this year. And they will refer to that as well. Now, thirdly, the report mentions how all of these challenges call for fiscal actions by the governments, and public-private partnerships are key too, but the fiscal realm is essential. And international support, the role of multilateral organizations could significantly contribute to this fiscal realm that will be key. And there's another macro dimension, and this links to the ideas expressed by the two Sebastians early on. Firstly, the report is extremely valuable in that it characterizes the distinguishing factor of the pandemic and how it has showed inequalities. Richard Horton said that we're not really going with a pandemic, we're going through a syndemic. And the fact that COVID-19 does not really depend on the attributes of the pathogen per se, but on the socioeconomic, cultural, governance-related situation of those affected by the pandemic. The less cohesive, more divided a society is, the greater the impact of the pandemic has been. I think that's one of the lessons we have learned thus far. Now, we could talk about cause and effect, but let's not. What does the report actually say? The report provides a fabulous assessment. I think it's very useful in terms of how the OECD, CLAC, CAF, and DEPTO have been talking about the inequalities for quite a while, and how the digital gap has exacerbated these inequalities. The less the more vulnerable individuals are not included in this digital transformation. We've seen that as a result of the pandemic, and The digital divide exacerbates existing socioeconomic inequalities. We knew that prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has simply magnified that effect. There are disparities in terms of skills, use, and access to the new technologies uh, um, between the various economic groups in society. And some of the the data contained, the information in the report is extremely revealing. Now, the report also talks about what the second Sebastian mentioned, and that is that above and beyond the ICTs, there are other key aspects. Access to ICTs is necessary, but as a condition, it's not enough. We need to have programs that will further skills among professors. We need infrastructure. We need much more than mere access or mere possession of a computer device.
Importante en condiciones de pandemia.
One very important aspect in the conditions of lockdown and the pandemic is the very low level of connectivity that the households in the region have. This was, of course, a problem prior to the pandemic, but of course, with COVID, it has become of the utmost importance. And it makes the difference between the ability to succeed or not among our students. And it means that, in fact, the entire school year could be lost. We are deeply concerned that many elementary, high school, and even university level students could be expelled from their studies because of their inability to perform due to limited access or other issues in terms of academic success as a result of distinctions between rich and poor, for example, in their ability to access the internet. When we talk about cooperation from Spanish authorities, we tend to focus primarily on the social compact, and that social compact that has to do with all of our educational levels, in the other understanding that we must all be efficient and effective. This has to do with the possibility to create social mobility based on merit and effort. And in that regard, certainly college level studies are of the utmost importance in that social mobility. So when we look at social mobility in the Americas, when we start with an upsurge in income and a widening of the middle classes, we can see that in Latin America, 2 out of 3 college students are the first people to get a university education in their families. Again, we've seen that social mobility in the region, and that is very, very important in terms, as I've noted, of the social compact to which we aspire. This report and previous reports have highlighted this. Now, what we're finding, however, with the pandemic is that the economic process can lead to widespread exclusion of lower class and lower middle class students from these levels of education. Of course, there are issues. Schools, places that have free education are more inclusive than countries that require payment. And that is an important level. If you lose your job, if there's lower income in the family, then in those areas of a higher dropout rate among college students is greater if education is not free. But this is particularly true among lower class or lower middle class students, families rather, who've made a particular effort to send their children to college. And again, we can see this upsurge in social mobility also thwarted. Another important factor that may contribute to the uptick in the dropout rate and a reduction in social mobility is the ability to connect per se. So again, this has to do with the legitimacy of the social system, the open nature of the society that has to do with social change. And of course, this economic shutdown, again, goes hand in hand in a very negative fashion with the lockout in terms of the ability to connect to educational services. Now let me turn to the second topic, social cohesion, digital divide in the midst of the relationship between Latin America and the EU. As we know, when we look at the first opportunity, December 14th, we'll have an opportunity for the two regions to once together come together and to try to reach an agreement on the formats for cooperation and this will be the first time that we'll be able to do this. Apologies, we are running very late. If you could go ahead and wrap up. Thank you. Well, yes, this is important because this coincides with the new cycle in the EU of the new instruments and the new cooperation instruments. We have a proposal from the EU for that dialogue that has to do with digital aspects and green elements, but it's very important to remember the topic of social cohesion. This has been a cross-cutting component in our strategies, and therefore when we are looking at the EU, and I think also when we're talking about the digital divide in Latin America and this green revolution, have to engage more actively. Otherwise, we are looking just at a technocratic approach, and that is another aspect that the report reflects in an extraordinarily eloquent fashion. And thirdly, just let me give you a bullet point here. This requires working hand in hand in terms of financing. The EU has had the possibility to use our banking institutions and engage in indebtedness. The Fed in the US has acted appropriately as well. But for Latin America and the Caribbean, for many countries, particularly those who are not able to sell bonds in the market, those who have very high levels of indebtedness, it is important to provide additional mechanisms to ensure external financing. I'm not going to list it, but there are a series of proposals there that go from extraordinary debt issue to loans, flexibility, payments, changes to the conditions of reimbursement to the financial institutions so that they can be counter-cyclical and not pro-cyclical, as to the use of multilateral lending institutions at the regional level. Again, a series of proposals that have been put forward that will be particularly germane and salient to ensure that governments have the wiggle room necessary to provide opportunities for this digital growth that will contribute to a closing of the digital divide. Not only ensuring that it doesn't grow, but closing that gap out. So thank you very much once again for this opportunity. And on that note, I would conclude my remarks. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose Antonio, Susana, Jose Luis, for these very interesting presentations, for the report, and for the challenges that you have reviewed. Unfortunately, we are running a bit late. I would like to see if I wanted rather to see if we had time for questions for the public, but I don't think we do. So just for a closing remark from our panelist, Sebastián. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Again, we only have 5 minutes here, and we really can't continue because we do have our closing session of the 7th Ministerial Conference in Information Society coming up in just a couple of minutes. But I do want to highlight what others have said, the importance here of political dialogue. We have to translate that into action as well. I think Georgiana, Jose Antonio, everyone has highlighted particularly salient issues, topics that we need to address, and certainly are, of course, the digital agenda cuts across many other social and economic agendas. And Susana has noted, Jose David has mentioned and has stressed this particularly. And if we're going to talk about any particular thing, I think that we need to have another session so that we can see how we will strengthen these ties with the EU and Latin America and the Caribbean to continue to move forward with ELAC. 15th anniversary this year. We need to continue to move forward again in our work with the EU. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for this event, and good morning and good afternoon to those of you depending on your time zone. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Me. Okay. Is there anybody?
Yes, Mr. Mario Bettini.
¿Qué tal?
Perfecto, lo escuchamos súper bien. Y lo vemos también.
¿El video está bien? Perfecto.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Gracias.
De la oficina del ministro Michelena, si gustan probar la conexión, por favor. Rafael, está el señor Eben Panguas de Uruguay en la lista de atendís. Por favor, ¿la puedes poner en panelista?
Ciao Giolita.
Yo,
How are you?
very good. How are you?
Fine, fine. So we see each other on Tuesday, no?
I'm more than happy. Yes, thank you very much.
Very well. Very, very, very well. Thank you.
To bring some energy, creativity, creative. Meaning, very good.
Yeah. But strange all those things, but good.
Buenos días, saludos desde Ecuador. Estamos haciendo una prueba de audio y video. ¿Me confirman, por favor?
Perfecto, los escuchamos y los vemos súper bien.
Listo, muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Señor Paguas, quisiera probar el audio, por favor.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Hola, ¿cómo están? Hi.
Muchas gracias.
Por favor.
Perfecto, lo vemos y lo escuchamos súper bien. Buen día, señor Mario Chimoni, ¿nos escucha? Por acá Rafael, ¿cómo está? Lo vemos.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo te va? Dame voz para saludar a los que están, por favor.
Ahí estás, ya todos lo están escuchando.
Ok, buenos días, buenas, ¿cómo le va todo? Buenas tardes a ustedes, buenos días a los de América Latina. Cariño, Mario, Yolita, Andrés, Herbert, hola, ¿qué tal?
Ciao Mario.
Eila, ciao Yolita, tutti i giorni noi, eh? Questo siamo più che i tre moschetteri, siamo non so cosa, eh?
Claro que sí.
Buenos días con todos.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We are all connected and coordinated. Good morning, delegates, authorities with us. Madam Executive Secretary of the Commission, Alicia Bárcena, dear Mario Cimoli, Deputy Secretary, Mrs. Jolita Búquer-Viene, Director for Latin America, Mr. Mario of the OECD, Roberto Paua of Paraguay, Luis Yañez, Secretary of the Commission, delegates of the member countries of ECLAC, special guests. We have arrived to the final session of this ministerial conference on Society of Information of Latin America and the Caribbean. You know that the Secretary electronically distributed the proposal of digital agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. Delegations received the document for discussion and comments. Two informal consultations sponsored by Ecuador on November 16th and 17th. It was adopted at referendum and subject to silence on November 19 at 7:30. Given the background information, I submit to the approval of delegates the document that contains the digital agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean, ELAC 2022. If there are no more comments, and we have decided to adopt it, approve it with a heartfelt applause. This has been our joint work. So thank you for the work of these days from delegations and prior work for this meeting to be a success. So, Digital Agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean, ELAC 2022, stands approved, adopted. Now, the presiding officers that will be with this chair are Mexico, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay. I would now give the floor to the delegate of Uruguay. Please go ahead. Thank you for the opportunity to open this roundtable. First, I would like to say that Uruguay will assume the commitment of continue to be part of the presiding officers and our commitment to be the hosts of the region and organize the next ministerial meeting on information society in Latin America and the Caribbean in 2022 in Uruguay. We support and commit to promote the new digital agenda of ELAC 2022, reinforcing each one of the objectives set forth there, and particularly contribute from our ability to share experiences, learn lessons, and knowledge, facilitate a space for exchange and regional articulation, leverage the synergies of regional and international networks of which we are part to the benefit of the countries of the region, and move forward in the implementation of specific initiatives to move from statements, declarations to action plans so as to achieve concrete progress for our region. Uruguay, from the very start, has constantly supported the processes of digital agenda of ELAC within the framework of ECLAC. In this 2020, 15 years have gone by from the approval of the Social Action Plan on the Information Society of Latin America and the Caribbean, adopted in 2007 in June of 2005 in Rio de Janeiro. And this has set forth new scenarios characterized by an economic and social collapse of unprecedented nature. In vis-a-vis this reality, digital technologies have proven to be essential tools to facilitate social distancing and mitigate the economic and social effects of the crisis. We need a cooperation agenda that will allow us to approach short, medium, and long-term challenges linked to digital inclusion, calling for renewed cooperation, facilitating the expansion of digital economy to all sectors of the population, and promoting trust and in the use of digital technologies. Thank you very much. Thank you for the offer that we have received. Congratulations, Uruguay. You will be the venue of the next meeting we'll have in ELAC. Now I give the floor to the Secretary of the Commission, Luis Yanez, to continue with the session. Thank you, Chair. Having completed all the tasks that were set forth in the agenda, we will now open the closing session of the 7th Ministerial Conference on the Information Society in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a pleasure to call on our dear friend, Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of Director General for Development and International Cooperation of the European Commission, Jolita Buquevicienne. You have the floor. Thank you. Hopefully our connection is stable. Yes, perfect. Thank you. First, I would like to thank for the organization, to the organizers for this ECLAC invitation, Mario and our dear friend Alicia, and thanks to the commitment of this beautiful country, Ecuador, the presence of the president at the opening session and their commitment with this subject. It's a true honor to share this virtual closing session of the 7th Ministerial Conference on the Information Society in Latin America and the Caribbean. With you, you are renowned names in this area. Jointly with all of you, we seek to leverage this capacity of digital transformation for a sustainable facing of the pandemic. And the idea is to have a sustainable development. And this is key for us in Europe, environmental sustainability, which is key not only in Europe, but for the future. Likewise, international cooperation has been made available. And here, this is the question, where is the EU? We want to contribute as a true, trustworthy partner for the construction of a joint narrative, jointly developed around a strategy that will make justice of the cooperation between Latin America and the EU. Jointly with you, we want to have a new strategy on the role of international cooperation and have a better partnership between the two parties, one focused on values and mutual benefits for our citizens and governments. Both parties don't have all the answers. Therefore, we need to put these subjects on the table, and thus we have a responsibility. This is a closing session, but at the same time, as we have heard, it's also the beginning of the new path, and his leadership is key. If you need chocolates from Belgium, I will send you to keep up the energy and have this agenda alive. Bearing in mind this dramatic context that we have received and and assumed in the last 9 months with interchange in this digital transformation, this subject is very relevant.
So we have a lot of uncertainties, but one thing is clear that for President Lenín Moreno, this was said at the beginning, there's no society today that can reach development if it's at the margin of technologies. There's no doubt that digital transformation is and it will be a great opportunity, but opportunities that I have to take on, I have to get on board, and we are going to, in this way, open new gaps also, because if I close one message, probably I'm going to create another gap in other side. This is a key tool that help us our reality, but should serve also to create new and innovative solutions. Problems that have limited our development for decades are going to be solved with this. So this is a key factor for the resilience of our people. I'm personally fully convinced that by looking at more inclusive societies, Latin America and the Caribbean has in Europe their natural partner today, and for many years has been so. So we don't want to break our relationship. I'm fully convinced also that digitalization and digital alliance between both continents can be an effective tool to raise the level, to overcome the levels of inequity. And if we do not take advantage of this, this gap will be larger. We need to make progress. We need to interact and take advantage of this now to go towards less vulnerable societies, more productive societies, a more open society. And that has to do with building a digital transformation for everyone. But this is not something that we have done easily in Europe. The European Union, we have undertaken a strategy that is being called Shaping Europe Digital's Future. You have had the opportunity to listen from the specialists from Europe about this yesterday, but I would like to emphasize the main features of the European model that is essential for cooperation between these two parties, because the digital Europe should reflect all what we think of the best of the European model, and this is diversified, democratic, and safe. So this promotes knowledge, innovation, and with different elements for economic growth focused on small businesses and also the startups. An essential element of our digital agenda is that this cannot be isolated developed. All the partners in the world based on international partnerships are essential, and these partnerships will foster more cooperation, more ambitious and flexible cooperation. So we need to provide content to this partnership. Our digital market places the user in Europe, the citizen of Europe, at the center of a strategy which is based on safe technologies, fair, inclusive technologies, acting on behalf of the users, which are, sine qua non conditions for us. Although we are joined by these principles, the member states of the European Union have a great diversity and richness, and these are the main features on which the European strategy has been built on. And this will be more expanded over the next year. So this is a unique framework to us, where we are going to be able to build a new cooperation framework between Latin America, the European Union, and the Caribbean. So a digital partnership, it will be at the core of this partnership between both regions over the next years, not just because this is for mutual benefit, but because that takes us closer to open new opportunities for cooperation, for innovative cooperation, for trade exchange and investment, something that is very important because digital transformation has multiple implications for development. So our digital partnership should be structured around three main areas of actions. One is technology for everyone. Second, open society, democratic, inclusive, and sustainable societies. And three, competitive, productive, and fair economies. This cooperation framework should include every stakeholders in part of the digital system, strengthening partnership between public, private actors, and the academia. Also, regulatory framework focused on the user should be provided. We called it human-centric approach in Europe and a more modern and transparent governance. The availability of infrastructure should be part of the objectives as well. But the training of our citizens, researchers, and businesses are essential. We have positive experience in this regard over which we can build upon. And one example is a program funded by the European Union. We have a fiber optic under the sea cable which has been laid down. And we have a special successful programs such as Galileo's, Copernicus, which have enormous potential to respond to significant challenges that we are facing, such as climate change, transportation, energy. And in the context of this new partnership, it would be mutually beneficial to expand the knowledge of these systems. Dear friends, we are now fully convinced that partnerships between Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean is, as part of a shared values. We are natural partners. We have common values which should inspire us to build a digital partnership that will go deeper into technical sovereignty and principles in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is one of the main challenges, and this is a great opportunity as well to ensure digital transformation of everyone and for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jolita. And now we're going to listen from Mario Pezzini, Director of the Development Center of the OECD. Mario, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk about this crucial topic. I have three main messages to convey, but the first one is that for a better reconstruction, we need a new social pact, and even the role of the digital transformation is related to this. It's part of this context. I think that for a better reconstruction, it will be necessary to have development model focused on the welfare of Latin America, and this can be achieved only with a new social pact that will lead the region towards higher social protection level, better public services, a more productive strategy, and a new government commitment and higher salaries. The new pact that we need is a kind of a new deal. We do not need this only in Latin America. And we are listening that the recovery from this crisis requires a general effort. We don't know where the growth sources are located, and so demand and investments are essential aspects. but repercussion will require the social pact. As a part of the social pact, we have the digital pact. We need to think of a digital transformation, not just a technical transformation, but also as a political transformation, which requires social pact between the state, the citizens, and the industries. Digital transformation is per se multidimensional. So this region is extremely important to be part of the national development strategies that many countries are just already involved. So having workshops as the one that we have in terms of the OECD, ECLAC, and the European Commissions are extremely relevant. This is the first point. We're not talking about the sectorial logic, but an essential tool. Although all this as part of a systemic view of a recovery of disease, which is one of the worst crises, at least the worst crisis that my generation has been aware of. And digital transformation is playing a key role to resolve the structural challenges. And here, I would like to resort to my personal experience. I was in a manufacturing region, and I had experience there to go from mechanics to control mechanics with numbers. And there, that many companies, small companies, had great competitive capacity with high income level and high mechanization levels. But they were facing a challenge that they didn't have in its genetics. That people could know trigonometry, but not IT, not informatics. What was necessary to be done in this crucial change to raise and take the benefits of digital transformation to anyone? We need to close the gaps, the digital gaps, which go beyond infrastructure and telecommunication. Digital transformation brings challenges, but also opportunities. 2 out of 10 job posts are at risk of automation in Latin America. Meanwhile, other 4 could subject substantial changes in terms of their tasks. That's why I think that 4 things are needed. First, we need literacy. If we have a new technical elements that need to be included into the productive process, industrial, commercial processes, it's necessary that every stakeholders are fully aware and acquainted with these technologies. The industrial system is not a big company that will make decisions and all the other ones will follow. But this is a permanent integration into different stakeholders who need to speak the same language. That's why literacy, digital literacy, is something essential. Second point, the services to entrepreneurs. We always talk about loan fundings, and this is very important. But there is another thing: how entrepreneurs can get on board of this new technology and they can enjoy about this new technology in their own companies. This requires to build real services led by the entrepreneurs to realize that technology also can be used, can be adapted to the existing methodology that they have. The other things is public sector services. We all know there is an important social fracture in many countries in all the world, but especially Latin America. And this is especially translated into mistrust of the public sector. The public sector can use digitalization today to get closer to citizens, to offer them with better services. Otherwise, this social fracture can cause a fracture of the social contract, which is, of course, has a very high cost. As any change, as any innovation, we need a permanent dialogue among the different actors, among the countries, where the countries need to learn from each other and find the proper platform for this. And which is the better platform for this? The regional platform, and for sure Latin America, to share ideas in this sense. ECLAC plays an essential role. Why? Because it facilitates and organizes the discourse, the dialogue, and the standards for the different sectors in Latin America. And I would like to finish with my third point. The third point has to do with a very personal experience, but also has been shared as well. Diego Maradona has died, and I feel like my personal loss, not because I would like to feel like Latin America, because as we know, Maradona was a hero in Great Britain, in my country.
Esto hecho de compartir cosas en los dos lados del Atlántico es muy.
The factor of sharing things in both sides of the Atlantic is very important. How digital cooperation can benefit from cooperation between the two regions, Latin America and EU. How this digital discussion can become a key tool. I will underscore one point. In the European Union program, there are a series of projects that facilitate investments in the digital field, in climate change. And so there are different economic activities related to this cooperation. I will not repeat what Jolita said in a much brighter way, but she has told us something else. Cooperation cannot be limited only to the investment issues and manufacturing and economic activities that indeed are fundamental, but there is exchange of knowledge in matters of public policy because of digitalization. Those changes will serve the region to make appropriate use of the new technology, providing or promoting regional integration, but also taking into account the need that this technological change to bring about inclusiveness will allow not only efficiency and innovation, but also updating public policy to a new development model, bringing citizens closer to government, really facing the social unrest, or supporting each other, both regions, so as to have a preeminent role also internationally. So what I'm saying is that in the economic arena, there are plenty of cooperation opportunities, but also because of social integration. One thing cannot move ahead without the other. An industrial fabric where there is no confidence, where people don't talk to each other, where businessmen only know about competition, it's not a fabric ready to integrate economic growth and innovation and technology. How can we facilitate or train the role of the region and discussion, not only between Europe and Latin America, knowing that digital disruption maybe leads to institutional disruption? I just wanted to underscore the third point. Digitization should be viewed within a framework of a change of development model where it is indispensable to design a social contract that is pending, missing in some countries, and that digital transformation can solve structural challenges if you guarantee literacy services to real actual services to SMEs and public sector services. In the end, regional cooperation is not only a place to exchange best practices, but also to move forward for greater progress of cooperation with the EU, because both regions are having similar challenges. And as to public policies, one should discuss. Each region has had experiences, and these experiences can be interchanged, and it is a space for learning. Thank you. Thank you, Mario Pezzini. Now, Herbert I was Executive Director of HASIC. Uruguay has the floor. Thank you. Thank you again. I would like to tell you about the situation of Uruguay vis-à-vis international cooperation, and also insofar as cooperation, what are our next goals, or a brief summary of what Uruguay is thinking, taking into account the information that we obtain from these events that are extremely valuable for us, not only this year where challenges have grown and speed has grown so much, but in previous years as well, and future years as well. Digital transformation is a responsibility of our states and the basis for building a free society, open and inclusive society. Technology, its incorporation and use are key to leave the crisis behind and promote economic reactivation, reconversion of productive processes, improvements in supply chains, manufacturing processes, as well as for transparency and efficiency in the public sector. Uruguay moves on with medium-term objectives, reinforcing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with the commitment of promoting a digital society, leaving no one behind. This was said by one of the speakers a while ago. And for that, we promote the inclusion of digital technologies in all the sectors of public policy and incorporating all players of society. Cooperation has been a key factor to drive the growth of the region, and with a really collaboration facing common objectives like the development of each one of the countries is a fundamental element for success, not only individual success, regional, interregional, as was said a while ago. The facing common problems, common solutions will lead to specific implementations, but of global reach, and in many activities and programs carried forward and supported by international organizations has become key of fundamental importance. Harmonization, standardization, integration in regulatory issues, rights and technology should be reached nationally, regionally, and internationally. That is to say, Uruguay is part of the GALC network, regional mechanism to promote digital transformation with equity in order to have economic and social reactivation. Uruguay is part of Digital Nations, an initiative that brings together the most developed, technologically developed or digitally developed countries in the world, and has a forum designed to share the best practices and identify ways to improve digital services among states. Also, we are part of the Ibero-American Network of Personal Data Protection, the network of transparency and access, and as I said before, we have supported from the start all the processes of regional ELAC digital agendas. And also we are part of the Ibero-American Data Protection Network, transparency, and as Mario was saying, the digital transformation of the state and the recovery from crisis calls not only granting rights, but guarantees as well. It's for Uruguay very important that citizens be able to access rights and guarantees, and of course obligations for us that are the rulers or are in government. The development of digital technologies have impacted socioeconomic changes globally, has modified radically the way in which we educate, produce, work, and consume. It has modified the way in which we interact among ourselves. We see this very acceleratedly these times, and also between us and government, and the way we use our free time. The speed of change has accelerated, as I said, changes that we all expected for the medium term, we have been forced to accelerate them and to accomplish them as soon as possible, because citizens do need it that way, and the government has to have them available in order to overcome this global pandemic in the best manner possible. Our country, that has been a pioneer in digital development and incorporation of ITCs, has the general challenge of going deeper into the use of these technologies. Although 9 out of 10 Uruguayans have internet access, they are not completely used by the population. There are some yellow lines that have been turned on in the midst of the pandemic, where we have identified a strength of the pandemic declared on March 14th this year, to identify digital gaps that without that unfortunate situation, we would have been unable to do it. We are presenting the 2020-2025 agenda with strategic priorities that will define the path of digital development and will transit with medium-term objectives, reinforcing commitment with sustainable development and driving digital society, leaving no one behind. We believe that the most important day of this government that took office on March 1st is 28 February of 2025, the day that this government ends. And thus, the conclusions is, what did this government do to improve the experience of citizens with government, digital transformation of the state, accessibility to government, transparency and efficacy? We had and have the opportunity to show resilience, to show that the country is prepared for this moment, to go deeper in the use of technologies of information to face the challenges and improve our working capacity to be more efficient and more transparent, to work, to try to do away with all the digital gaps. It's also working to do away with social gaps, a global challenge that no country can ignore. And we will work with all players and with the commitment of citizens mindful of the digital challenges, and of course with the cooperation and our commitment and of international networks of which we are part, that make us progress, all of us jointly together, leaving no one behind. And countries with which we are contributing not only to individually, but collectively in this digital transformation. Thank you, Mr. Awas. And now, Andres Michelena, as chair of this 7th Ministerial Conference on the Information Society in Latin America and the Caribbean. President, you have the floor. Thank you, and I congratulate all the participants and organizers of the event that brought us together as a region. We have closed a cycle of 4 days of good working days within the framework of the 7th Ministerial Conference on Information Society in Latin America and the Caribbean. We've had high-level panels, experts panels, and workshops. The representatives of the region worked 5 hours a day amidst the pandemic crisis and emerging pressures of each one of the authorities. Thank you very much for the time devoted to this workshop seminar and to this building of a new digital agenda 2022. We have learned from many experiences about digital development in the region. We are surprised by figures and opportunities leveraged in difficulties and stimulate the role of the role of SMEs is very stimulating. We admire the role of women, workers, peasants, everybody that has done everything possible to move forward in spite of the heart crisis. But also, we have taken note of opportunities regionally. Yes, we make progress. Yes, we have. We have innovated. Yes, we have. But still, the road is insufficient. We still have a lot to do. So, the road that has been treaded is valuable, deep, committing, but not enough. We still have a lot to do ahead. So allow me to emphasize that we need to move forward. Without a continental political decision, we won't be able to tread our road to the future. It is we need the commitment and political will at the highest level. So let us set in the record the fact that we need to have a continental summit. ECLAC has the role to convene these subjects that will involve the whole region amidst the pandemic, productive vulnerability, and economic recession.
This high-level meeting would have a historical responsibility to build the future for the digital era in Latin America. In the meantime, while we go along that way, I can't quantify my proposal on November 23rd because I'm fully convinced that the experience narrated by the countries participating in this conference, apart from will, we need tangible resources, a lot of resources, so we can turn this regional digital agenda into a reality. We need to provide connectivity to millions of Latin American people, including the technologies. This is something urgent. We need to act first in rural areas, in these areas of the continent, because they're claiming for urgent actions. The diagnosis is that this is the time to go for their solutions. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, we need to make this into something concrete. We need to create a Latin American fund for telecommunications, and my president role will be working for a regional agreement with the 33 member countries according to the poverty index, lack of connectivity, and absence of connectivity. So this is the purpose for February 2021, that where I'm going to call the member countries to start a working meeting with the technical support of foreign affairs ministers and also technical institutions. Do we require financial and technical support? We open a dialogue to multilateral perspective, and we will make progress building this proposal along with investment. The multilateral meetings will provide technical assistance to assess the projects as well as the seed capital that needs to be provided to scale up all these projects at the regional level among the multilateral approach. The European Bank, French Agency for Development, and the World Bank will be also essential participants. We have coincidences in our countries among all the topics which were dealt with, and the economic cooperation in the region has a new partnership. And which is this new partner? Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, and some other social organizations and private institutions have agreed upon the creation of funds for the development of these new technologies focused on the rural sectors, development of ICTs, and digital inclusion, which is a strategic element to reduce not only the digital gap, but the social gap and poverty in this continent. The states have had capacity to react in front of this pandemic. Yes, governments focus on digital transformation, remote work, telemedicine, serving the most vulnerable sectors. ones did better than others, and other ones did what they could. So this experience should be shared. We talk about inclusive cooperation. The ones we know more will contribute with more. About friendly regulatory markets, Ecuador considers that progress was made. Peru said that reliable framework should be installed, and together with regulations, and all the spectrum allocation should be provided free of charge. And so an action line was also proposed to be taken to go further along this line. Optimize the budgets of each country in the region is something essential. In terms of database decisions making processes set by Ecuador, of course, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and Ecuador go hand in hand with this idea about telecommunication. There was coincidence that publication of digital content promoted by the government should also have the citizen support. This meeting has enabled us to clarify the menu of challenges that we have in the short, mid, and long term. Connectivity requires clear leaderships and definition of tasks and competences. Given that resources are scarce, we need to set up very clearly the priorities roadmap focused on value creation and stimulating the digital trust and reducing cost, ensuring privacy and citizens' security with cyber security, and protecting private data, to have a participatory citizen. So we have a long things to do, but the challenge is huge. The quality requires continental cooperation, and this regional fund could be an element to join the participation of the countries to close the social and digital gaps and to open a road for emerging technologies. The 4.0 technologies can go through our digital roads, favoring better interaction among all the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm fully convinced that this time we are going to have the perfect channel to go deeper into the integration of our region and integration of our peoples. Thank you so much. Thank you, President. And to close now, Mario Cimoli, Executive Secretary, will take the floor. Thank you, Lucho. Thank you, Luis. I would like first to greet Yolita. We were in another conference. Thank you so much for being with us. Mario Penzini. Well, we don't know where we are now. Well, thank you so much, Mario, for being here. Ever Powers from Uruguay, also thank you so much. Important, very important has been that Uruguay has been here with us, especially with the view of a 2024 conference ahead. So I would like to thank very especially to Andres, because presidency of Ecuador and all the work and all this organization that has been very inclusive, and we have had the pleasure to have such an inclusive organization that has been great. And so it's important to close this part of the meeting with all these good aspects. And I would like first to thank the European Union. Why the European Union? I want to be very honest. This project is stemming from ELADIS. More than 15 years ago, a project where European Union has invested in Latin America. Very importantly, and ICLAC could take this over, and this initiative in the cooperation was something really exemplary, how the substantial project was built upon this. And after this, all the other countries and presidencies added to this, recently Colombia and now Ecuador and Uruguay deserve congratulations. And also I would like to congratulate my friend Mario Benzini, because with the European Union we have put very clear points, and Mario is a friend, is a partner. So it's a pleasure to close this conference with his presence. And the presidency of Ecuador has made these conclusions very clear. He has put forward debate along many areas that has been properly underlined. And I think that creation of regional funds for access to new technologies, the ICT technology, is something very important, because we have realized as a region that this is a process, this mechanism needs to be worked jointly with European Union, with the Central Development Friends, with our countries, and to create a directive committee of this sort with all the countries, where all the countries have cooperated with this, is something very important. So the creation of a regional fund for the generation of these technologies, it's important because it recognized was published in the ECLAC document that the cultural features of the regions, the countries of middle income countries of the region, the countries in transition require more support, more technology. COVID crisis has surfaced this crisis, and this fund comes in a crucial moment, and not because of resources only, but also because this serves as a platform to be all together, platform for the region, and platform for a dialogue with Europe, which is something essential in the long term. The other things which is absolutely important is cybersecurity. As the minister from Ecuador said, each country by itself won't be able to win this match. Is Europe is looking at this from a regional perspective, we have to do the same. So large countries of the regions that are involved here is something extremely important. Countries as big as Brazil, we're just looking at this as something important. That means that we are working in something essential. That means that our countries and the ECLAC and all the mechanism, we are all playing a very important match. And I would like to congratulate Ecuador for putting this on the table. So why is this so important? Because without data protection, without having a regulatory framework, we're not going to succeed, and this won't work. And so we need to think how we are going to build, how we are going to set up our posture in terms of cybersecurity, which is so important for regional integration. It's so important to have a platform from which to build upon. And so if some country has a small market that is very small, it would be difficult. But if we have a Latin America with big countries such as Argentina, Brazil, and we need to work all together. So cybersecurity, data protection is something essential. And the other thing which is very important also that we have kicked off here, and the European Union has insisted on this, is social, productive, and industrial aspects. Our situation, structurally speaking, we have problems to resolve. The digital tool needs to be a tap to open this. What we're dealing as poverty, the women, all that has to do with the invisible groups of the society. We have to resort to the digital tool to surface these and to make all these problems visible. If we cannot make this visible through the digital tools, well, we're going to have a problem. And that's the point that this ministerial meeting, this ministerial conference has put this also as something relevant. The productive aspect, Latin America, to create inclusion, equality, we need to increase and diversify productive systems. That is known by the president of AGESIC from Uruguay, the minister of Ecuador as well. They know that productive structure plays a key role, that SMEs needs to be included, that processes should be more inclusive in terms of productivity. So the digital aspect and productive aspect is something extremely important. I would say that cyber data security aspect important to be included. So digital aspect, it's important for nuclear policy, and this is an essential part of the dialogue and access to markets. I think that these conclusions are very important. The countries of the region had put forward initiatives and has put forward demands of participation of the private sector is essential. The private sector has participated, has been constructive, has been part of the debate, and that is something that we think that this has been a public-private partnership and has been a process that has enabled us to include all of us. Otherwise, it would be something difficult to achieve. So I think that these are very important results. The executive secretary of ICLAC, who couldn't be here, she greets you all, and we are very happy that being part of the secretariat of this conference. And with that, I would like to thank the European Union, my friend Mario Pezzini, and Ecuador, Uruguay, because this preparatory meeting in February that ICLAD will support us together with Uruguay will enable us to have a final balance of what we have done and to think ahead. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to ICLAC staff, and thank you, Sebastián Rubira, Nelson Pérez, Georgina Núñez, Valeria Jordán, Fernando Rojas, Alejandro Patiño, Laura Póvola, Claudia Guerrero, Francisca Pire, Andrés Benninger. They had been really spectacular. This wouldn't have been possible without the conference team led by Mrs. Johnson, and thank you for the ICT team. Special greetings also to my friend Luis Yañez. That was done to reach conclusion. Guillermo Cunha, a political work of excellent level. At the ECLAC, we are not excluding anybody. ECLAC considers everyone are part of the table because ECLAC has to do with integration. And thank you very much, and special greetings to all that great executive secretary is thanking you all and greets you all. We are very proud of this digital technology is going to be a driver, and we're thinking of integration as a driver. Thank you so much. And with this, we conclude the event. Greetings to all the partners and a huge hat to each one of you.